A report on the illicit trade in Ireland's antiquities.
I believe it's second only to the drugs trade in terms of turnover. I've seen that estimate made.
When countries of origin have very tough laws, which has been the case around the Mediterranean for a long time, and which Ireland is now introducing, it becomes a smuggler's charter.
After the 87 amendment, a lot of people just packed it in. They felt that they could be unfairly treated under the law.
This church vault on a remote island is the site of one of the most notorious, although not perhaps well-known, thefts that has occurred in Ireland during the last decade. The objects stolen from here attracted a price tag of well over £1 million on the international black market. But their real value is far, far greater than that. What the thieves took were large stone carvings from this early Christian monastery. The theft of the stones is just one in a long list of items in the catalogue of plunder of Ireland's national heritage.
You only have to walk in as a visitor into the National Museum in Kildare Street in Dublin and see this extraordinary collection of antiquities. There's no other European national collection to match this. And what you see in the National Museum or in the Belfast Museum and the Irish material in the British Museum is just presumably the tip of the iceberg of what was lost and what may still be under the ground in Ireland itself.
In this case here we have a small 15th century gold ring which has a Roman gemstone set in it, a much earlier gemstone. That was found at Castletown, County Louth by a young boy using a metal detector. This here is a decorated slab of the early Christian period, which was stolen from an early Christian monastery at Carron Temple in County Sligo, but they were subsequently recovered, and a dealer, an antiques dealer, was prosecuted.
Well, now the case of this 2,000-year-old bronze bowl, which was recovered from Westmeath, is an example, I think, of where, although the object was recovered, there was a lot of damage done to the site.
The man who found this using a metal detector simply dug down into the grave and removed the bowl, which contained cremated human remains. He emptied the human remains back into the hole and backfilled it. The bowl wound up in the possession of a dealer from whom he subsequently recovered it.
So it's as important, or more important maybe, to protect the site as it is the individual object like this?
Well, I mean, that's exactly why we don't want people digging into sites in an uncontrolled way. They destroy information.
Well, now this, I suppose, is the jewel in the crown, the famous Gerina Flan chalice, discovered in 1980, wasn't it?
Yeah, the discovery of this object really popularized metal detecting through the 1980s. And it resulted in organized gangs of treasure hunters getting together to loot archaeological sites and so on.
It also led to a significant change in the law.
An amendment to the National Monuments Act was brought in, which regulated metal detecting, protected underwater sites, and indeed increased penalties. The 1994 legislation has specified the state's ownership of objects, and finders are paid rewards for material.
So the law as it stands now is that the state owns all archaeological objects, whether they've been discovered or they're still under the ground or underwater.
Yes.
And what if you break that law?
Well, you face a £50,000 fine or a year imprisonment.
Since 1987, the loopholes in the old Act have been tightened up. They were very effective, and they gave the police a much more direct role in seeking out evidence than they had previously had. The 1987 Amendment Act was a great step forward and led to a lot of problem solving.
Well, I think the new legislation in the later 80s and the more recent amendments has clearly had a good effect. There will be less public looting of sites of national importance. But I think that it would be wrong for people in the Irish establishment to say all is now right, we have these laws in place, it's now impossible to do this. It's not impossible. I would have thought the trade is restricted, but it's still there.
Well, there's another classic one, a Sheila na Gig, which was stolen again from near a church. And this one, again, one can find very swiftly. There we are. And this particular one, there again, you can look up the issue and page and then actually find it in the magazine. And you've got this lovely photograph of it. Nowadays, of course, something like that would have to have an export license on it to be taken out of Ireland. So if it hasn't got an export license, you have to say, was this perhaps stolen?
It's always been a very exciting idea, treasure hunting. And it's a natural part of that finders keepers. You know, you don't go treasure hunting for the state, you go treasure hunting for yourself. So that the prime reason, I think, why this kind of legislation is not going to work is that people will go on behaving like human beings, as they've always been, and they will go on looking for treasure.
On my first dive, actually, in the open water, I happened to drop down on top of a Bronze Age shield. I didn't know what it was. I took it home, had it for a while, and I just asked a local person, and he got very excited. He said, it's a Bronze Age shield. He said, it's 3,000 years old. And would I mind if it was, he told the museum about it, and I said, if they're interested, carry on, which he did.
This is Inchclairon, known locally as Quaker Island on Lough Ree in the Upper Shannon. And it's from this national monument site that a treasure hunting gang stole a number of 6th century stone carvings. The gang dragged the stones from inside a protected vault and managed to ship them across the Atlantic, where they were offered for sale to Boston College. But in an elaborate sting operation involving the FBI, the deal was stopped and the stones were recovered and returned to Ireland. However, many other valuable artifacts stolen from here and the nearby Saints and Inishbofin Islands have never been found.
You have people at grassroots level. You may have local farmers, local farm labourers who know of where the stuff is coming from. You know, so-and-so from the local pub got priceless stuff out of such a lake dwelling. It's all there waiting to be got if you have the guts to go and get it. Then they sell these on to middlemen who are respectable people, in inverted commas, doctors, dentists, priests, local clergymen in their parishes. And they in turn then, when they want to exchange something that they have, which is not ideal for them, they can exchange that for some other thing priceless that they just need for their collection. And the way you exchange it is by selling it on to a big man abroad, on the London market, to wealthy businessmen in Britain, Germany, America, wherever, the Near East.
Treasure hunters simply couldn't continue to operate without a good market for their treasures. And here in London, just such a market exists. This is the hub of a lucrative international trade in antiquities, with many valuable items often ending up in the showrooms of the major auction houses, such as Sotheby's and Christie's.
I do think that there's kind of a false awe created in people's minds about the major auction houses in Britain and indeed elsewhere. They are mechanisms for turning works of art into money. That's what they're there for. They have exactly the same basis of operation as any other commercial venture. And to kind of pretend that they're anything more than commercial ventures is, to most curators worldwide, a bit sickening.
There is a code of convention which they say that they subscribe to. They will not sell looted antiquities, yet time and again one sees them offering for sale antiquities without provenance, which it's fairly clear are looted, and even in a few cases antiquities which they must know are looted.
One of the major auction houses in London knowingly tried to sell Irish antiquities, which they knew had been found in Ireland and illegally removed from this jurisdiction. And in fact, when we asked for the provenance of the material, we were lied to.
I think the influence of the auction rooms in London is quite undue. And you see, the awful trouble is that I don't think that they could care the proverbial tinker's cuss as long as they make their profits. Now, they say that they're greatly interested in art and the heritage. Not when it comes to money, they aren't.
A lot of the end buyers say of a beautiful Celtic brooch, which has been dug up somewhere, obviously. They buy it perhaps from a dealer. Now, they trust that dealer. The dealer has bought it perhaps from a sale room. The sale room has had it in from somebody just walking in off the street. Now, that person walking in off the street has signed a form saying that it is their property, so that they put it into the catalogue and they're selling it on behalf of the vendor who said, well, this is my object. He may be lying.
Almost everything on the market has been illegally discovered in the last 20 to 30 years.
So it's by and large an illegal market in the majority of cases.
It's by and large a market in material which was smuggled out of its country of origin, yes.
You cannot quantify it because you don't know how large it is. Most of the illegally excavated work is done at night or on sites that aren't known. So when the legitimate archaeologists move in, half the artifacts have already gone. So I think the problem is much larger than it's imagined. Ireland has done a lot, much more than most European countries, to put a stop to it, but it is still an incredible problem.
There are no restrictions on the sale of antiquities from Northern Ireland to the rest of the UK, and the different laws in the north makes protection of the common Irish heritage very difficult. What are the essential differences in legislation between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland?
Well, as things stand, the state in the Republic may claim any artefact that is found, any archaeological object found in the ground in the Republic can become state property automatically. Northern Ireland legislation, that doesn't apply. We have no right as of law to claim archaeological finds on behalf of the public collections or in the public interest. We have no such right. Objects of antiquity can be exported from this jurisdiction, from Northern Ireland, and taken anywhere within the UK and into the mass market of the south of England, and we have no means of preventing that.
Well, the legislation we've just laid before Parliament now, it modernises our existing legislation, which dates from 1971, bringing it largely up to speed with what obtains in Great Britain, particularly for the protection of archaeological sites and monuments. We're keeping historic strengths, such as the licensing of archaeological excavations and the requirement to report the discovery of archaeological objects. These date from the 20s and 30s. And we're introducing some new measures to control illegal treasure hunting, metal detecting.
There is legislation on the way, but again, I feel it's minimalist. It's addressing the question of monuments and the caretaking of monuments and the administration of the kind of transactions that can happen between a monument owner and the Department of the Environment. We in the museum profession need something much more specifically directed towards artifacts.
In spite of the different laws, cooperation between the authorities, north and south, recently led to the conviction of Samuel Jackson. Mr. Jackson, the PRO of the Northern Ireland Metal Detectors Association, was found guilty of handling stolen property, a priceless lunula or gold collar and brooch stolen from the Dunraven collection in Limerick in 1969.
He was prosecuted for receiving stolen goods. He was convicted of the charge and he was sentenced to 12 months in jail. It's the second occasion when we have pursued people beyond our borders and have put them in jail, in fact. It's also shown the very close cooperation which exists between the state authorities in the north and in the Republic. We've been working very closely with our colleagues in the north of Ireland for quite a while, because the network, the treasure hunting network, is based nationally.
How can you be sure that your society won't be abused by criminals who may want to go out there and search for archaeological objects?
Well, if anybody applies for membership of our club, they're carefully vetted as we can do it. There is a probationary membership period, and we monitor them fairly closely. We can only do so much. We would also be, at all times, prepared to listen to any information about prospective members who come from the authorities, including the museum or the OPW.
Given that the man who was prosecuted in Northern Ireland was the PRO of the Metal Detectors Association,
Yeah.
do you see that in some way as reflecting the overall reputation, let's say, of people involved in metal detecting?
Well, I think the metal detecting community have got, you know, to answer that question themselves. I would see it for my own part as, you know, part of the increasingly sort of criminal nature of aspects of the metal detecting community. But that's a process which we saw here in the Republic over the last couple of decades, and I'm not surprised that it's taking the same route in the north of Ireland.
What happens if you find somebody in your society who has in fact broken the law?
They'll be expelled immediately.
Has that happened?
It has.
Where would you see it possible for people who use metal detectors to operate?
One could go a little way further towards facilitating the relatively harmless majority who would like to metal detect as, we'll say, a Sunday afternoon activity. I would say that conceivably on beaches it might be allowable to metal detect without license on the grounds that it's unlikely that damage would be done in such a context.
The metal detecting enthusiasts simply went out and got the lists of monuments which were produced by the state for the use of the planning authorities to protect these sites, and they used them as hit lists. They've contributed nothing. All they've done is gone out and dig the monuments that we've located. That's not a contribution. If we know where the monuments are, then we really don't need the services of the metal detecting community.
The 1987 National Monuments Act has often brought those who look for treasures into direct contact with the law.
12 months ago, I had 3 detectives knock at the door. I answered the door, and a search warrant that they could come in by force if necessary. And obviously I was stunned. They took away a box of rubbish, and the next day it was returned to me, and they retained 4 items that were described as archaeological objects. I was informed afterwards there's no prosecution, no question of a prosecution in the case, so I want it back.
The Gardaí search houses under warrant. They have to go before a judge and present evidence to support that in advance. On every occasion that the Gardaí have searched premises, they have found unreported antiquities. That's a fact, on every single occasion.
A 3-month amnesty, which followed last year's amendment to the law, allowed hunters and collectors to hand over their treasures to the museum without prosecution. But some say that the illegal trade will continue and that there are still large collections in private hands.
I have seen objects in private collections that are truly marvellous, and in the real sense of what is marvellous. I'm not saying that they were all got illegally. I have seen chalices, I have seen enamel brooches like what came out of Lagore Cranog under the American Harvard team excavating there in the 30s. Equally remarkable stuff is coming out of the Westmead Lakes privately and now illegally. I have seen magnificent crucifixion plaques, all kinds of treasures.
So what's your view then of the law in Ireland? It's something that has been introduced as a result of pressure from archaeologists and those who want to protect the Irish heritage.
My view of it is that it's unworkable. I mean, it reads like a mirror image of what exists already in many of the poorer countries of the globe, particularly the Mediterranean, South America, China, and so on. The ruling that everything under the ground is state property is always going to be challenged.
But it won't stop the people at grassroots nudging you and saying, I've got something that would interest you, and if you give me £2,000 for it, even though it's worth $1 million, 2,000 counted out in tenors on a farmer's table is a lot of money here and now. You give me 2,000 for this, I'll make it worth your while. I think that that does go on. I've every reason to believe it does. Maybe not on the same scale.
What do you say to those who suggest that the new tough laws have failed to stamp out the illegal trade in antiquities and in fact may have driven it underground?
Well, people badly disposed towards heritage protection have always been underground. and they've had to be investigated and winkled out and brought to their senses. So I'm not impressed by that argument at all. People of goodwill have always cooperated with the authorities. And I'm just simply not impressed with it. It's enough to make a cat laugh.
Well, I suppose that the people who are really interested in antiquities, museum curators, private collectors, and dealers, because it's their livelihood, but particularly the end purchasers, look on the legislation that exists in most poor countries at the moment as nonsensical, that there should be an international trade. There's no reason why everything Irish should stay in Ireland and everything Italian should stay in Italy. There should be a free trade in things which scholars find interesting or collectors find interesting. So that because the legislation is looked on as unworkable, stupid, wrongly thought out, most of those who are interested in antiquities ignore it.
We now have among the strictest laws in relation to the protection of our heritage in Europe. Critics would say that the legislation has not stamped out the illegal trade in Irish antiquities. It has in fact driven it underground into the hands of unscrupulous operators.
Well, I think anyone who would say that is really talking to their hat. In the first place, the illegal trade is underground to start with. What we've done with this legislation is root it out in the open. Very often I've heard it said, largely by apologists for the big auction houses, that if you introduce strong legislation, you drive the thing underground, you start a criminal underworld. That really isn't the case, provided you have enforcement of the law, and also provided the legislation has popular support. And I believe that this legislation has strong popular public support.
I still dive. I dive all the time, and I have seen much more important items than a few bronze axes. There are thousands of bronze axes. I've seen much more important stuff, but I won't. I don't take them. I just bring them up top of the water. You can't see underwater, and I look at them and throw them back again.
Legislation can only help if it's backed by a national awareness that it's a good idea to have this legislation. So it's rather like drink and driving laws. You have to have people who say around their firesides it's not a good idea to rob Ireland of its antiquities.
The question is, can one enforce it, and will the people accept it? As far as we're concerned, if we can persuade landowners, for example, to simply pass over objects to the Ulster Museum, all well and good. The farming lobby out in the countryside is very, very important to us. After all, they own most historic monuments in the countryside. And it's more important, I think, for us to persuade them by force of argument than to persuade them, as you might call it, by force of law.
Make it understood generally that by buying looted antiquities, people are subscribing to the looting, subscribing to the destruction of our past. And so it shouldn't be smart, really, to have these things in your front room or on your mantelpiece if you're a person of great wealth. I see it rather like the fur trade. It used to be very smart to wear sable coats or something, and now it's seen that people that wear sable coats are contributing to the destruction of rare species.
You can't really protect everything from everybody. And similarly, you can't protect all these crosses and cross slabs. All you need is somebody to rob Ireland of an Ardagh chalice or a tower brooch or something similar, for which they will get millions of pounds sterling on a black market. You only need a few of those, only one of those things to go, to impoverish the Irish people. And I think that this is wrong, and it's still possible to do it.
In spite of tough laws here in the Republic of Ireland, the illegal theft and looting of ancient Celtic treasures continues. The laws have certainly put the treasure hunters under pressure by effectively outlawing the hobby of metal detecting. But with less stringent legislation in Northern Ireland and the UK, the secretive and often criminal trade in antiquities is still in operation. And with the impossibility of fully protecting remote historical sites, such as this uninhabited island, it's clear that the threat to our national heritage has not been lifted.